Till they can kill us and they will also die. I can't understand for what.
When big
Hello, this is Impact. I'm Yalda Hakim. In a major shift in the global security infrastructure, it's thought no one in the country is vaccinated. Amid Sri Lanka's ongoing political and economic crisis, a new prime minister is to be sworn in shortly. We'll have the latest live from Colombo. That's all coming up here on Impact. Ukraine, that's set to change. The country is now set to apply for membership of NATO. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, is in Dnipro for us. Lise, over to you.
Yes, welcome to Dnipro. We're in central eastern Ukraine. It's a shared border with Russia, 1,300 kilometers long. Well, in a joint statement by the President and the Prime Ministers a few hours ago, they said Finland must apply for NATO membership without delay. With Moscow along a shared border, which explains a lot of what has happened. But now Finland appears to be throwing in its lot with NATO, strengthening the Western military alliance at this historic moment as it watches, and indeed not just watches.
So did not use this mechanism, but instead of that planned a war against Ukraine. And of course, this is something that we cannot accept. And we are currently living in this kind of limbo for European security structures. There's no
understanding that this country should now join the Western military alliance, that for many, many decades it thought that it was better off not joining in order to preserve those difficult relations with its neighbour Russia. It is a significant now may also have come to an end for the moment, as Finland has decided that for its own safety, Lise, it is better off inside that alliance, and all of the people I've spoken to here say that that's probably the best bet for Finland.
NATO contingents coming to Finland, more training exercises. What will it mean in tangible terms?
It's difficult to know at the moment, but being a NATO member gives NATO and Finland in coordination of that happening in the early days. But that's something that certainly gives reassurance to Finland. Of course, as you suggested there, it then changes. It then gets rid of Finland's other role as that great mediator between East and West. It means those great summits
right across the border. So it's a good day to bring our security correspondent, Frank Gardner, who is on the scene in Narva on the Estonian border with Russia. Frank, before I ask you about Estonia and what it makes of the moves by Finland, and we expect...
Yes, it certainly could. The Russians are not happy about this. They warned both countries not to do this. They said that it would make security worse in Europe. Certainly that's the Russian perspective. And they have been very specific in the sense that they have said they have warned. There is a sense that while he is distracted with that, this is quite a useful breathing space for NATO, including the Baltic states, where I am right now, Estonia. Troops who were stationed, Russian troops who were stationed and in some cases exercising essentially Finland and, if necessary, Sweden for joining the other side. Because make no mistake, the Kremlin considers NATO not to be a defensive alliance. They consider it to be a threat to Russia. And they're extremely unhappy.
And Estonian leaders have been among the most vocal since the start of Russia's invasion, in fact, even before, warning about the risks. I'm assuming they welcome the moves of Finland and...
Fill that. There was already reinforcements here. So after the invasion of Ukraine, Britain sent a second battle group to join its Challenger 2 tanks that are already deployed here. So you've got over 24 main 180-degree opposite of what he wanted, which is he wanted to push NATO away from his borders. And instead, he's got NATO reinforcing those borders. NATO is not going to cross the border. They're not going to go into Russia, but they are very worried that Russia is going to come the other way. It makes no difference, she said. Eventually, President Putin's strategic goals will be the same, and that is to create a buffer zone of Eastern European countries. So they are in no doubt that ultimately President Putin has got his eye on this.
Across this region, particularly those on Ukraine's borders, are now reassessing their relationship to Russia, and they're also looking back at history. And of course, Ukraine is the country most of all which is having this reckoning. We were reminded of this at the start of this week at the commemoration mark of a new effort to try to take down the statues in a more organized way and decide to do something with them. I've been speaking to Nadia Lishva, who is in charge of protecting the cultural heritage in Dnipro, and she explained.
We want to remove these symbols that don't tell us the truth. We can see a Red Army soldier with a young girl planting a tree together. That means they are growing a future. That is very symbolic for the Soviet time. We want to open the museum of the totalitarian regime, where the monuments connected with the Soviet time and also with Russia will be displayed.
It's just one of the many ways in which the life of this country has been upended with Russia's invasion. We'll continue to provide coverage from here, but back to you in London.
Lise, thank you so much as always. Now some breaking news.
It is people here expect him to bring some stability. He has become the consensus candidate. In fact, he lost the parliament election 2 years ago, and he came to parliament through a national list. And now, with one MP, he has now become the prime minister. He managed the economy, and they wanted the entire government to step down. But Ranil Wickremesinghe came out from nowhere because there was other political parties which had more seats, but he is seen as a consensus candidate who has got an experience and also good links with the Western nations.
Nature, all-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm, nurturing and loving. P-Mark must...
One person can cause an effect. One person in HR can challenge outdated hiring practices, champion modern benefits, advocate for pay equity, and turn jobs into careers.
This is Impact on BBC World News. I'm Yalda Hakim. The North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has ordered nationwide COVID lockdowns. The measures were announced after...
First of all, they've ordered a national lockdown, which we've not seen before. And secondly, they've told us what's going on, and they've told the people what's going on. It's possible, as you say, that we've had potential cases before, even though they have denied it. And so this is challenge is going to be to control it from spreading, and they've clearly decided that a national lockdown is really the only way to try and stop this from happening, and you just can't do that without letting people know.
Jean McKenzie reporting there. Now, black hole...
Image. It's revealed by swirling hot matter, pulled in by powerful gravitational forces. Ziri Yunsei is among the 300 scientists involved in the project.
I think it's really cool and amazing that we can...
Incredible pull.
Black hole is the glue which binds our galaxy together. It's part of the evolution of our galaxy. It explains where we came from. It will explain where we're going to.
More than 500,000 computer simulations have been done, who came up with the idea of photographing a black hole when he was a student in the 1990s. He was told by his professors that it would be impossible.
It's a fulfillment of a dream and the beginning of a new chapter, actually. Studying black holes.
Researchers, this is just the beginning. Theory has now become reality, and they can now kick on to find out how this black hole really works, and even how our own galaxy came to be. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
Project, and you'll recognise Ziri from the piece that Palab Ghosh just did now. Ziri, I mean, this must be so exciting for you, because this is what you look at all day long.
Yeah, we're all absolutely delighted. This has been 5 years in the making, and finally, and the reason why we're looking at them is because they're so big, we have a chance to be able to capture them with telescopes.
And that is quite significant that has happened now. I mean, Palab was just saying something that was sort of an idea or a theory has really become a reality.
So it does both, actually. So it does suck stuff in, but it also spews a lot out too. And that's really interesting. So you see like jets in some galaxies, not in our own, but you do in many other galaxies. And that's really important because it being able to spew out matter into the intergalactic.
And when we say the beginning of something, the beginning of what? What does this teach us?
So this is, I think, in many respects, the beginning of a new era in our understanding of black holes. Objects which were purely theoretical entities are now physical things that we can observe. We can close to that now, the edge of the universe, so to speak.
And helping us understand more about our own planet, our own universe?
Right, indeed, because black holes are like gravitational glue, in a sense. We believe that there is a supermassive black hole in the heart of every galaxy. So understanding our black hole will actually be key for us to understand where we've come from and perhaps even where we're going.
And then will it become easy, just briefly, to photograph other black holes?
Right, that's a fantastic question. So far we've only imaged 2 black holes. So
we'll be back in 30 minutes' time. You can get in touch with me on Twitter. I'm at BBC Yalda Hakim. Business News coming up next. We'll be back in half an hour.
It is. Further south, more rains from the remnants of Astani, which is now just a depression, but lots of rain to come across eastern areas, across Kerala. It's coming onshore in Andhra Pradesh, but also some very wet weather on that southwesterly monsoon into parts of Sri Lanka. So warnings out here. Very wet, as you can see, further south in Kerala, in Karnataka, across Sri Lanka, as I've mentioned before, and also up across northeastern states into Bhutan, Bangladesh and Myanmar. It remains really quite wet here. More rain than we'd normally see at this time of year, continuing to push above 40 for most days. As I say, dangerous heat around.
से सरसों कैसी हंसी मुस्कानों की धुन जिंदगी मक्खन खोलो ढक्कन डूबी-डूबी-डू जिंदगी मक्खन
is coming closer and a feeling here now that nowhere is safe.
Страшно, когда мины летят.
A new way of earning a living is emerging in the online world, one in which work and play are one and the same. Could this be our future in the metaverse? Our world. Welcome to the metaverse on BBC.
This is BBC World News. I'm Yalda Hakim. The Dr. Mahinda Rajapaksa resigned on Monday amid anti-government protests. Mr. Wickramasinghe has previously served as Prime Minister 5 times. An international team of astronomers has unveiled the first image of a supermassive black hole of the centre of.
Now on BBC World News, the latest business news from across the globe. World Business Report.
We're starting this out with Apple, which has just lost its position as the world's most valuable company. That's amid a big sell-off of technology stocks. Saudi Arabian oil and gas producer Aramco has reclaimed the top spot from the iPhone. Less risky assets. Well, let's get the thoughts of Michelle Fleury, who's in our New York bureau. Michelle, good to see you. So it's quite a moment, isn't it? Apple losing that top spot. It's held it for quite a while, and it tells us a lot about the shift in sort of investors' thinking right now.
As you say, Apple was the dominant technology company, certainly in terms of market capitalization for a long time. Now it has slipped back. But, you know, remember, it wasn't not that long ago that it hit a valuation of $3 trillion, the most of the prospects for energy look much brighter as the price of oil has increased. Some of that is related to the pandemic. Some of that is related to the war between Russia and Ukraine. On the tech front, you're seeing a reappraisal by investors pulling out of tech supply constraints. And they've warned that, you know, going forward, that could have a huge knock-on effect on sales. They were talking about, I think it was $4 to $8 billion knocking off in terms of sales in the next quarter. Here around the margins of billions and trillions of dollars. But I think, you know, what we're talking about really here today is this fundamental shift going on right now in terms of where investors see prospects. And, you know, you talk about the price of Brent. At the same time, this interest rate question, what central banks are doing around the world, that is making a difference. What it does is it means that by raising borrowing costs and raising interest rates, investors can get higher returns on different investments. And so some of the more speculative investments.
But for now, thank you, Michelle Fleury there, as always, standing by in New York. Now, let's turn to the world's biggest entertainment company. Shares in Walt Disney have been on the rise after some better than expected numbers. Disney signed up nearly 9 million.
Massive competition when you look what Disney's doing. I mean, it's one of the, I'd say, most successful product launches, you know, potentially we've ever seen on the consumer side. It's all content. I mean, you go to Hulu, ESPN, the Disney content, that's the key. And there are three, I mean, it's a riches of content. And they have some of, when you talk about Star Wars and others, some of, you know, the best franchises out there and content ever created. You know, and then now you look at ESPN and Hulu, look, and a lot of it comes down to price. I mean, the bundle.
Back and they said, we're not going to license it for you to put on your platform. We're going to put it on our own streaming platform. And we've seen that there's been a proliferation in the number of broadcasters that have got their own streaming service rather than traditionally putting it on Netflix. Level is hit. Netflix did this quite a while ago, didn't they? But do we get to a point with Disney that everyone who wants it has it, and that causes a real problem?
I don't think we're there for another year and a half, 2 years. And I think right now it continues to really be a share game.
Has fallen sharply over the last 24 hours. The price of Bitcoin has hit its lowest level since July of 2021. Bitcoin losing more than 50% of its value over the last 6 months alone, amid a market-wide downturn that's wiped more than 1.5.
What's going on is that I'm getting rather nasty kind of flashbacks to Lehman Brothers collapse in 2008. I'm sure you remember that, Ben. I was a TV reporter at the time, and I was interviewing bank bosses who were saying, you know, it's bad for Lehman. But then, of course, some of those banks collapsed or near collapsed and had to be taken over by other banks in the days following. And this is because of the vague contagion that happens during a panic. So international markets started seizing up back then. People gone from $120 to almost zero, like literally 3 cents on the dollar as I looked at it a few minutes ago. And again, whilst it doesn't necessarily have a major connection directly with other cryptocurrencies, it's the panic, the contagion.
Indulge in the luxurious, the most spacious, and supremely comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine.
Using completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality, and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony with nature, life can be great.
The mustard specialist since 1933. Barso se sarso.
Hello, I'm Ross Atkins with Outside Source. This is the extraordinary story of climate change. Vaccines for Ukraine. Let's look at some of the international reaction. Tell us what you've been hearing. In practical terms, what does that mean? And let's just remind ourselves, this is all part of the same story.
Piece the story together.
Partick. This is Sport Today. We are live from the BBC Sports Centre. Coming up on the programme, England get their man. Former New Zealand captain Brendan McCullum is announced as the new men's test coach. World Rugby announces its host country, Swiss, is here. England have their man. The ECB was looking at other names too. This is thinking outside the box, isn't it? Why do you think they've gone for McCullum?
You're right. On the face of it, this is a pretty bold choice by England. As you say, Brendan McCullum made
Limited overs cricket. He's currently in the Indian Premier League with Kolkata Knight Riders. He's never actually coached in the more traditional red ball form of the game. So in that sense, it is perhaps a little bit of a gamble. But England, for their part, they will feel that, frankly, they simply have to confronted them head on. So certainly a sense that he's going to do things very much his own way. There'll be a lot of interest in his partnership with Ben Stokes, England's new captain. They seem to be men cut from pretty much the same sort of cloth, both very exciting, adventurous cricketers.
Rugby, after it was announced the country will host the Men's World Cup in 2027 and the Women's Tournament 2 years after that. And they tweeted their delight earlier saying, simply, we did it. The World Rugby Council unanimously approved Australia's bid. It's hoped that staging 2 World Cups in those matches. And before all of that, England have been confirmed as hosts of the 2025 Women's World Cup. The Rugby Football Union says it wants the tournament to be the best attended Women's World Cup and aims to fill Twickenham's 82 here in Rome in 2017. Took the opening set 6-3. Was made to work a bit harder in the second. The Australian fighting back. It went all the way to a tie break with Zverev ultimately holding his nerve to win it. And the women's event defending champion Iga Swiatek made it through to the last 8 after beating the 2013 finalist Victoria Azarenka in straight sets. The world number 1 came from behind to win the first set 6-4 before dominating the second. Juventus defender Giorgio Chiellini has confirmed he'll leave Juventus at the end of the season. The Italian centre-back has been at the club for 17 years. He joined from Fiorentina and he's pretty much won it all, hasn't he? 9 Serie A titles, 5 Coppa, 110 to 107 in Milwaukee as the NBA champions came from 14 points behind with just 10 minutes left. It was nail-biting stuff for the home fans. Giannis Antetokounmpo missed a free throw to level things up at 4 Game 6, and that is on Friday, tightly poised for the moment.
I mean, obviously we're in Boston. We're down 14 in the fourth quarter. Like, kind of just, people would say that every single game.
And the Grizzlies play the Warriors off the court as they won Game 5 of their series to make it 3-2. The Grizzlies were without star man Ja Morant. Didn't matter though. Desmond Bain, Jackson Jr., Tyus Jones each scored 21.
From the opening tip, I mean, we have great flow and, you know, they were more aggressive than us, reflecting in the 30 free throws to our 13. And we all had the mindset we were going to close.
And the Denver Nuggets surprised Nikola Jokic by flying to his hometown in Serbia to present him with the NBA Most Valuable Player award on Wednesday. You might be wondering why an incredibly tall man coming in behind a horse on a 2-wheel cart. Well, Jokic is a huge fan of horses.
Indulge in the luxurious, the most spacious.
Footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality, and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony with nature, life can be great.
The mustard specialist since 1933. Barso.
कभी परछाई बनके कभी विश्वास बनके दिल में साहस का एहसास बनके उम्मीदों को सच्चाई के रंग से सजाते हैं मुश्किलें कोई हरदम.
An app to answer any questions you have about the big stories of the day. Reality Check. Get the facts straight.
Another Chinese container ship has just arrived here in Athens. China now owns most of this port.
Will be the arrival of Hollywood star Tom Cruise on the French Riviera to unveil his long-awaited sequel to his 1986 film Top Gun. In that picture, young Tom Cruise played a hotshot US Navy pilot in a movie that really material I got at the junket, including the interview with Tom Cruise. And I found it, so here it is.
I feel the need for speed. Ow!
Top Gun didn't get very good reviews in America.
These flyboys who are sort of posed like models and who get the girls and who take great risks, and it's all very flattering to the teenage audience.
Although Top Gun has done remarkably well at the American box office, it's not without hard. The only woman in the film commanding a presence is Kelly McGillis, who's been cast as an astrophysics instructor pursued relentlessly by Tom Cruise.
Why don't you just tell him why you've got him here? Well,
And now, just last week, 36 years after the original Top Gun, a 59-year-old Tom Cruise flew onto an aircraft carrier in San Diego for the global premiere of Top Gun graduates. The star pointed out that there is a connection between the two films.
We're not going to do a cover of the first one. It has to have its own story. And yet you want to be able to, I think about it on a shelf if you pull off Top Gun, the DVD.
That may be hype, but the hope is that this Tom Cruise film will really fire up the international box office, still suffering because of the pandemic.
Of many Finnish people, and Finns are very security-oriented people. We are asking, what if this happens to us?
In Sri Lanka, the veteran politician Ranil Wickremesinghe is sworn in as Prime Minister. Also in the programme, that's all coming up here on Impact. And the West. Now, in light of Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, that's set to change. The country is now set to apply for membership of NATO. Our chief international correspondent is in Dnipro for us.
Welcome to Dnipro. We're in central eastern Ukraine. As Stacey says, he has unleashed because of the threat posed by NATO. And yet today marks a step not just of NATO not moving away from Russia's border, but of significantly enhancing NATO's membership. The news of the day takes place. Well, Finland has had a very uneasy relationship with Moscow along a shared border, which explains a lot of what has happened. But now Finland appears to be throwing in its lot with NATO, strengthening the Western military alliance.
Like the OSCE, and which is built to avoid the war and avoid military conflicts. And now we have seen that this security order does not function. In Europe, Russia didn't trust these mechanisms, Russia didn't use these mechanisms, but instead of that...
What they think of this move? I know the opinion polls show that there's strong support. What are you hearing?
One man saw that we were a TV crew just now. He came up to us and gave his thumbs up and said, NATO. Understanding that this country should now join the Western military alliance, that for many, many decades, it thought that it was better off not joining in order to preserve those difficult relations with its neighbour Russia. It is a significant decided that for its own safety leads, it is better off inside that alliance. And all of the people I've spoken to here say that that's probably the best bet for Finland.
Yes, and it wasn't so long ago.
It's difficult to know at the moment, but being a NATO member gives NATO and Finland, in coordination, in dialogue, that possibility of having greater reinforcements here. I should say that Finland has been on the threshold of NATO for quite some time of that happening in the early days, but that's something that certainly gives reassurance to Finland. Of course, as you suggested there, it then changes. It then gets rid of Finland's other role as that great mediator between East and West. It means those great summits
ago, but what we have been is we have been not part of any military alliance, so there is a difference, and we have always fully supported the EU's joint actions on Russia and on Ukraine. It takes steps against anyone, so it depends on Russia how our relationship will develop. For the time being, obviously.
Is this, though, poking the bear at a time where there's heightened tension? There's the...
Sorry?
Did you then, given that you're saying that you weren't part of that sphere of influence, that Ruski sphere of influence, the way Belarus is, but the way Ukraine is, was this necessary?
Well, it is deemed necessary, and the other outside that would not be beneficial for either of us. So we are very happy that Sweden is about to take the same step at the same time.
Although you have warned in various newspaper articles and interviews, you've been quoted
with a very efficient Finnish national defense. But once we are part of NATO, they will look at us as potential enemies, which we are not, because NATO is not threatening Russia, much less Finland is.
Tuomioja, Finland's former foreign affairs minister, speaking to me earlier. Now, the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has ordered nationwide COVID lockdowns. The measures were announced after the country reported its first outbreak of COVID-19. State anti-government protests. He was chosen after other opposition politicians refused to take up the post under the presidency of Gotabaya Rajapaksa. On that, our South Asia editor, Anbarasan Etharajan, joins us earlier from Colombo.
In fact, he lost the parliament election 2 years ago, and he came to parliament through a national list. And now, with one MP, he has now become the prime minister. The president's house is just behind me, and Mr. Wickremesinghe just left a few minutes ago after being appointed as the links with the Western nations as well as India, so that he's able to now, he can bring together a coalition, a unity government to take this country out of the economic trouble.
Anbarasan Etharajan there will stay with us here on Impact. Still to come, court.
Luxurious, the most spacious, and supremely comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
Searching the skies and into the very heart of our galaxy for a mysterious and elusive black hole. Now they've found it and taken this picture. The black hole is at the centre of the image. It's revealed. A black hole is created by a dead star collapsing in on itself. It has such strong gravity, not even light can escape its incredible pull.
Black hole is the glue which binds our galaxy together. It's
told by his professors that it would be impossible.
It's a fulfillment of a dream and the beginning of a new chapter, actually. Studying black holes in great detail. They're no longer fantasy. We can test all our understanding and our model.
BBC News.
Well, earlier I spoke to one of those scientists involved in the project, Dr. Ziri Yunsei, about how exciting this photograph is. Have a listen.
This has been 5 years in the making, and finally we've been able to share this with the world. So there aren't so many of those, and the reason why we're looking at them is because they're so big we have a chance to be able to capture them with telescopes.
And that is quite significant that has happened now. I mean, Palab was just saying something that was sort of an idea of all being swallowed up in a black hole. It's something that sucks everything in.
Right.
What does it actually do in space?
So it does both, actually. So it does suck stuff in, but it also spews a lot out too. And that's really interesting. So you see like jets in some galaxies, not in our own, but you violent objects in terms of their environment, but they're also responsible in many ways for the being anchors of galaxies and in a sense for hosting life like ourselves in our own.
And so let's just have a look actually of this
objects which were purely theoretical entities are now physical things that we can observe. We can see the matter that's orbiting around it at near light speed. It's incredibly hot and producing all of this light, and that matter that we're resolving, we're seeing its.
More than 1 million lives cut short across America. This, the only way to visit them now. Laura's father, Alfredo, caught COVID while in a nursing and rehabilitation facility just as the pandemic. Pranks and hasn't healed from his sudden death.
I feel like I don't want to. That pretending that he's still kind of around, and because his presence was so ginormous that I still feel it, that it's hard to accept that he's actually.
During the scariest months, morgues couldn't keep up with the fatalities. bodies were buried in mass graves. Nothing ever paralyzed the city in this way.
New York is looking more like its old self, but it hasn't
home harder after her close colleague Freda Okran became the first nurse to die in New York's public hospitals from COVID. Flandersha says even though COVID cases are now manageable, they are facing another crisis, a shortage of staff. New York.
Now, it's a nightmare thought that most of us try and shut out of our minds as we board a plane. You're mid-air and your pilot falls ill, unable to fly. That's what happened to one American air passenger with no flying to the radio, and luckily it worked. Mark LaBelle has this incredible story.
When the pilot of this Florida-bound single-engine Cessna 208 suddenly got ill mid-air, he fell against the controls, sending the aircraft.
Delta, Roger, what's your position?
I have no idea. I see the coast of Florida in front of me, and I have no idea.
With just the Florida coast for reference, Mr. Harrison was then given step-by-step instructions of what to do next. Runway, so he could land safely.
He was calm all the way in. How am I looking? I just said, your altitude's good. You're 1,000 feet, you're 600 feet, you're 300 feet. And then he disappeared off the radar scope. So I was kind of like, uh-oh, what do I do now?
Website where we still have a live page of the conflict and invasion of Ukraine. Our teams are updating those from the ground and from here in London. You can also get in touch with me on Twitter. I'm at BBC
Southern and western states of India. Red warnings out in Rajasthan just to illustrate how intense that pre-monsoon heat is. Further south, more rains from the remnants of Astani, which is now just a depression, but lots of rain to come across eastern areas, across Kerala. It's coming at night. We have had that heat across central parts of Asia, somewhat cooling down in the next few days with a scattering of showers that are moving in from the west, lifting some dust as well, but heading to Pakistan and that intense heat is with us. Temperatures expected to get towards 50 in Bangladesh and Myanmar. Remains really quite wet here. More rain than we'd normally see at this time of year. Some showers around in Dhaka, for example, and Colombo, but the heat there with us in Islamabad. Looking towards New Delhi, for example, temperatures continuing to push.
Steps. Extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality, and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony with nature, life can be great.
The mustard specialist since 1933. Barso se sar.
Most spacious and supremely comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
को सच्चाई के रंग से सजाते हैं मुश्किलें कोई हरदम साथ निभाते हैं कल आज और कल में रहते हैं देश के हर पल.
Senior Democrat Senator Mark Warner. The US is sending weapons and money to Ukraine to confront Vladimir Putin. But with economic troubles and political polarization at home, is this country ready for a new era?
BBC World News, I'm Yalda Hakim, the headlines. The leaders of Finland have called for their country to apply for NATO membership without delay. Finland, which shares a huge border with Russia, has reassessed its traditional neutral stance since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. The veteran served as Prime Minister 5 times. The North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has ordered a nationwide lockdown after the first outbreak of COVID was reported. He's been seen wearing a mask for the first time. It's thought no one in the country is vaccinated. An international team of astronomers has unveiled all your latest headlines here on BBC World News.
Now on BBC World News, Hard Talk asks tough questions in interviews.
The wake-up call America needed.
Ukraine's victory in the war with Vladimir Putin.
Well, my sense, Stephen, is that this is not only an attitude that's reflected by
politicians, by the American public. Quite honestly, I think it is the British government, the British public, and sitting down with the head of, I'm chairman of the Intelligence Committee, sitting down with the head of the German spy services, and they still didn't believe that Putin was going to come in at this level. So I think there is this unity of purpose that we, America, that the level particularly of artillery assistance, we are giving American artillery that frankly is real time Ukrainians are training on out of country. Again, the British government has done some of the same. And this notion of where...
You phrased that carefully. People training
again, clearly we're seeing, and I think it's appropriate, that the diplomats that exited the country as the war started are coming back, not just to have enormous respect for the Ukrainian forces, but without that total Western support. And that, again, is something, there are many things the Biden administration may have not got right, particularly in Afghanistan, but in terms of rebuilding the coalition and keeping that coalition united, the fact that the Germans took the lead on stopping Nord Stream 2, I don't think any of us could have predicted that 3 to 4 months ago.
As you just said, you're the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. You know a lot of what is going on. How surprised have you been by the depth?
I've seen the public reports, but there's been no official U.S. government confirmation.
No, but you know the inside story.
Again, but that's not my role to share that information, particularly on a broadcast show. But I will say this, that leading up to I think, put Putin off his game by that willingness to share intelligence and frankly share, as we had to convince our European allies that this threat was real.
But Senator, everything you are talking to me about, that is the incredibly close intelligence cooperation, the arming of Ukraine, the Russian narrative, a narrative that Vladimir Putin has just repeated on his Victory Day speech, when he basically says we in Russia are facing a war with the West, with NATO. What Sergei Lavrov...
Whether it's with COVID, some of the political dysfunction in this country, can liberal democracy be successful against authoritarian regimes like Russia or China? And I think what at least the Ukrainian people have said is they are voting with their lives to say we will give up our lives.
Neutralize Russia and destroy Vladimir Putin's regime.
If this was only an American action alone, even though America is far and away the preeminent military power in the world, if this was only American action alone, it would not carry near that weight. The fact that we have NATO united, the fact that countries like Japan, Australia, and others are engaged.
Yeah,
but I think that's
what matters is the United States. When the Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, said not long ago...
Sometimes I have the luxury to say things that perhaps senior administration officials should take a bit more care. But I look at, I believe, Liz Truss, the UK Foreign Secretary, calling out as well the war crimes that Putin has committed. When this individual who's become more and more disconnected from, in a sense, reality, the pictures we've all seen of Putin meeting with whether foreign leaders or their own Russian leadership, him at one end of the table versus the other end, it speaks 1,000 words.
Be a limited battlefield nuclear weapon or something very much more terrible. We are dealing with the leader of the world's second nuclear superpower. When you take the stance you are taking,
but the notion that we would suddenly turn a blind eye and say, when this is all is forgiven and we're going to invite you back in to the club of respectable world leadership, I'm not sure how that meeting
been since 1945.
We live in a very, very dangerous time. And an aggression that was purely started by Putin's grand design of recreating the greater Russia, and whether we stand with
to make a concerted effort to disrupt American democracy in this year of midterms, 2022.
Well, having led the investigation when Russia massively intervened in our elections in 2016, knew no network boundaries, we know they've got these capabilities. And quite honestly, it has been probably the greatest surprise that Russia did not shut down the internet in Ukraine, that there's still videos getting out, that they've not launched a more massive Russian cyber effort, whether it's directed against Ukraine, whether it's directed against Eastern Europe, whether it's directed against the UK or America. But I think we have to keep what's called, in a sense, shields up for the foreseeable future.
If it comes against the United States, will it be regarded as an act of war?
That is what
is defeated and seen to be defeated, President Xi of China will see it as some sort of green light to invade Taiwan. Do you agree?
Well, first of all, I would take issue with your notion that they are my political opponents. Matter of fact, Senator Rubio, economic challenge, technology challenge, and long-term military challenge.
You would call China an adversary?
I would call China's goals with their authoritarian capitalism model, a model that, frankly, the Soviet Union competing in a whole series of areas, and one of the things that we're launching right now is this alliance of democracies so that we can try on a technology competition basis to maintain both innovation and that technology lead, because as we've never been a good bet to bet against America. Are we going through enormous challenges? Absolutely. I think, frankly, again, this goes back to the question I was asking. Over the last few years, we've seen liberal democracies, whether it be in America.
$1 trillion of new tax and spend measures is stuck, not least because people in your own party, in the Senate, your own colleagues, Manchin, Sinema, they won't vote for it. And the public is thinking, where's the leadership here?
I guess, were there
the Senate
an infrastructure bill that took, for the last 8 presidents, people have said it was going to happen broadly bipartisan.
You know the facts just as well as I do.
Together.
Let's think about Biden and time. He's running out of time. The midterms are coming up, and a fellow Democrat in the House says, she says, we are in big trouble if we can't even govern decisively.
Within the Democratic Party, there's always been divides between those of us who are on the more moderate or pro-business side and those who are on the extreme.
The Republicans on the grounds of culture and social issues. And I'm thinking primarily today here in the United States about the extraordinarily heated debate that has already begun about the future of they're not characterizing this as jumping into the culture wars.
In the notion that a woman's right to have control over her own body that has been basically precedent-driven law for 50 years is going to be reversed. I think that will drive
You want to take the Republicans on in a culture war?
One of the things that about at least politics in this country is it's hard to predict umpteen months out, but the fact that this has been forced onto the political...
Patrick Maloney, who said just the other day, abortion is going to be, quote, the central choice in the 2022 election. You're seen as a centrist Democrat. Do you see it that way too?
I believe that as people think of...
By the time the next election comes around, or just a few days after, that means he'll be 86 when he is still in office as President of the United States if he wins a second term. Is that healthy for America?
Let's 15, 16 months.
Senator Mark Warner, sadly, we are out of time. Thank you very much indeed for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you.
कितना लजीज है नए रंग में ढला ये मेरा चीज है
BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
कल आज और कल में देश के हर पल में कल आज और कल विश्वास बनके दिल में साहस का एहसास बनके उम्मीदों को सच्चाई के रंग से सजाते हैं मुश्किलें कोई हरदम साथ निभाते हैं.
Of this. Did she not think she was going to get that question?
It's important to remember that this is a negotiation.
It's a good photo of.
I have an opportunity to create chaos.
There is always an email. We are so insignificant.
Forces. A week of commemorative events in honor of Archbishop Tutu is well underway all over South Africa.
There's more trouble here in the Netherlands. Small groups of people destroying things in the northern city of Groningen.
The clashes are taking place just...
Breaking news.
This programme asks plain questions with the help of the unrivalled range of BBC journalists right across the world. And gathered here in this building, I'll also draw my time reporting.
On BBC World News. Follow the world's top golfers via the BBC Sport website and app.
This is BBC World News. I'm Matthew Amreliwala. On today's Global, Finland's leaders announced that they will apply for NATO membership without delay. Finland says it's been
from NATO, but now there is more, not less NATO in this region.
Also on today's programme, we'll be live at the White House as the United States passes 1 million COVID-related deaths. President Biden calls
of a dream and the beginning of a new chapter, actually.
Finland is expected to formally announce its decision next week. Moscow has reacted angrily, saying Finland's NATO entry posed a direct threat to Russia and said it will take reciprocal steps. Finland shares an 800-mile border with Russia. So let's get the...
Yes, day 78 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and it is an invasion that President Putin repeatedly emphasizes, says he had unleashed because of the threat from NATO. And we were reminded of, well, let's get more details about what's been happening in Finland today. We can join our Europe editor, Katja Adler. Katja, what are you hearing from Finnish officials today about their decision to want to join the NATO military alliance?
Foreign Minister here today. Parliament will now debate it, and there's expected to be a formal conclusion and bid to join NATO at the beginning of next week. There's no doubt about it here. There's been an absolute about turn in political. Finland's Foreign Minister this morning, Pekka Haavisto, he told me that the Finns were practical people and they were just looking to defend themselves better.
We have had security mechanisms in Europe like the OSCE, and which is
not just in their interest if they join the military alliance NATO, but they feel they have a lot to offer as well. For years, Finland has been operating alongside, if not inside, NATO. It has a very sophisticated, well-equipped military, and
it was allowed to join. It would take years, if not decades, for them to meet the criteria. But when it comes to Finland and Sweden, as you say, they already are close enough to the military alliance. It won't take that much time for that checklist to be done.
If Finland and Sweden were to join NATO. So what about that space in between saying they want to join and NATO actually taking them in? At that point, of course, they'd come under the umbrella of NATO's Article 5, which means an attack against one member is considered an attack against all.
Katja Adler, our Europe editor in Helsinki, thank you for joining us. These are truly historic times, perhaps unthinkable as many as a few months ago. Let's cross to Washington and join a former U.S. ambassador to NATO, Douglas Lute. Douglas Lute.
To formalize their relationship and apply for actual membership in the alliance. So this is historic. In the 70 plus years of NATO history, this has only happened 9 times.
But it's not without
practical steps Russia could take. So it may issue threatening rhetoric, but in practical terms, given its military performance in Ukraine, it's not clear to me that it can pose any sort of immediate an agreement between NATO at the time and Russia called the NATO-Russia Founding Act. It looks, however, that this blatant aggression by Russia has set those diplomatic openings aside, at least for now, as it takes. We're in for the long haul.
Douglas Lute, thank you very much for joining us from Washington. As much as it takes for as long as it takes. That is what makes President Putin ever more in eastern Ukraine, but many believe far beyond. That's all from us for now. Back to you in London.
Lise, thanks very much, and plenty more from Lise through the course of our programme. Now to our other main story here. The White House has announced that the United States has
each leaving behind a family, a community, forever changed because of this pandemic. My heart goes out to all of those who are struggling, asking themselves, how do I go on without him? How do I go on without her? And with thousands still dying every day, now is the time for us to act, all of us together. We all must do more. We must honor those we have lost by doing everything we can to prevent.
More than 1 million lives cut short across America. This, the only way to visit them now. Laura's father, Alfredo, caught COVID while in a nursing and rehabilitation facility just as the pandemic was ripped.
That pretending that he's still kind of around, and because his presence was so ginormous that I still feel it, that it's hard to accept that he's actually not here.
More than 40,000 people have died in this city.
COVID because I didn't want to get my family sick.
Nurse Flandersha was acutely aware of the risks of her job. It hit home harder after her close colleague Freda Okran became the first nurse to die in New York's public hospitals from COVID.
And I've never, ever seen that in my lifetime.
COVID's tragic legacy will be felt for generations. 1 million dead is an incomprehensible number, but will it be a catalyst for change to prepare
the outbreak of COVID-19? The outbreak in the capital, Pyongyang, is said to involve the highly transmissible Omicron variant. Until now, North Korea insisted its strict quarantine measures kept the virus at bay and rejected repeated international
believe they're Omicron, but we don't know how many. We just know that it is enough for them to order a national lockdown, which is something they haven't done before. But, you know, up until this point in the pandemic, they've claimed not to have a single case, which is very difficult to believe. Know now that they need to be able to control the spread of it, and that in order to do that, they need to have a national lockdown. And of course, you can't lock down a country without telling people.
Jean McKenzie. Now here in the UK, the Metropolitan Police says it has now issued a hole in the centre of our galaxy, and we'll hear from the scientists who made the discovery.
Wallonia, a way of life where creation thrives.
Welcome back to Global here on BBC World News. Our main stories: Finland's leaders announced that they will apply for NATO membership without delay. Russia says it will be forced to take reciprocal steps. The White House has announced that the United States has passed. Brother, the president, also resigns. Well, let's get the latest from Colombo. Let's speak to our South Asia regional editor, Amber-Hassan Ethrajan, who's covering all the developments for us. And Amber-Hassan, this new Prime Minister, tell me more.
Come up and take over the Prime Minister's job. You know, why this election or why the new appointment? Because Mahinda Rajapaksa, the previous Prime Minister, was forced to resign after violence between pro and anti-government supporters, and there have been protests going. There was huge, a lot of people waiting outside petrol stations and also panic buying in shops. And that is why Ranil Wickremesinghe, he has got very good contacts in the West. He's a, pro-market politician, and he's also close to India. And many people hope that Mahinda Rajapaksa was only the first step, and we want President Gotabaya Rajapaksa also to step down, because the Rajapaksa brothers were responsible for this economic crisis. But President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has firmly ruled out, stepping down from it. And they wanted some friendly politician, and that is why they chose Ranil Wickremesinghe. But these protests are still continuing, and there have been a lot of social media debate. Yeah. But it's not very clear that is going to reduce the anger of these protesters.
Amber-Hassan.
Part of our galaxy.
for a mysterious and elusive black hole. Now they've found it and taken this picture. The black hole is at the centre of the image. It's revealed by swirling hot matter.
I think that's truly remarkable.
A black hole is created by a dead star collapsing in on itself. It has such strong gravity, not even light can escape its incredible pull.
Black hole is the glue which binds our galaxy.
Actual image. Scientists believe that this video reconstruction is the closest to what the black hole in our galaxy looks like. No single telescope can see the object, so several have been linked together to create a giant observatory on Earth. He was told by his professors that it would be impossible.
It's a fulfillment of a dream and the beginning of a new chapter, actually. Studying black holes in great detail. They're no longer fantasy. We can test all our understanding. It's a dream come true after 25, 30 years.
For researchers, this is just the beginning. Theory has now become reality, and they can now kick on to find out how this black hole
story. Let me show you the live pictures from the White House because Joe Biden chairing that global summit on COVID-19 as the US passes 1 million COVID deaths. Here on the programme in the next few minutes, we'll talk live to the US Health Secretary. That's here and that's next.
How intense that pre-monsoon heat is. Further south, more rains from the remnants of Astani, which is now just a depression, but lots of rain to come across eastern areas, across Kerala. It's coming onshore in Andhra Pradesh, but also some very wet weather on that southwesterly eastern states of India as well. But as I say, the heat has to be that main story, a really dangerous heat by day and by night. We have had that heat across central parts of Asia, somewhat cooling down in the next few days with a scattering of showers that are moving in. And Myanmar remains really quite wet here. More rain than we'd normally see at this time of year. Some showers around in Dhaka, for example, and Colombo, but the heat there with us in Islamabad. Looking towards New Delhi, for example, temperatures continuing to push above.
When we live in harmony with nature, life can be great.
The mustard specialist since 1933. Barso se sarso.
कल आज और कल में देश के हर पल में कल आज और कल में देश के हैं कल आज और कल में रहते हैं देश के हर पल में रहते हैं
1956 से आज तक LIC हर
BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
Without delay. Finland says it's been forced to change its stance after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Moscow threatens to retaliate over Finland's move. Also in today's programme, most valuable company. Welcome back to BBC Who's There in Oxford. And John, your assessment straight away of this move by Finland and probably at some stage soon also Sweden.
Yes, Finland finds it easier to join NATO than Sweden does. Sweden's been bordering Russia feel about its own security when it watches what's happened to Ukraine. And secondly, the foreign ministry, the Russian foreign ministry, was incredibly heavy-handed about it and warned.
Exactly what Putin was railing against in the run-up to the invasion in Ukraine, NATO on his doorstep. Now he's got more NATO on his doorstep.
Well, this is why it is such a defeat for him, and it's a defeat simply because
this has become, over the last few days, vitally strategically important, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. Snake Island is the Russians' opportunity to attack both Odessa, the city and port of Odessa, which is hugely important to Ukraine. I mean, it's the place where most of Ukraine's exports of grain and fertilizer right throughout the world go through. So if the chances are that Ukraine will be able to protect it pretty well. And there is a further possibility, just a little bit along the coast, is Moldova, and the entrance, as it were, to the Ukraine, to have them on their western border. And in fact, it looks as though this is all about Ukraine's really concentrated effort to protect its coastline and to stop the Russians.
Yesterday that Russia was not cooperating with authorities in Ukraine to supply DNA so that Ukraine could send back bodies to Moscow.
It's all really part of a huge country. And the notion of things like CCTV cameras, for instance, doesn't really sink in with a lot of those soldiers. So time and again, we've seen pictures of Russian soldiers the West do. Does it just simply say, well, we've got the names and the descriptions of people, Russian soldiers who've carried out these offenses, but yeah, we'll just let them go? That doesn't sound very likely, does it? And Ukraine would be, of course...
In Ukraine. Thanks very much. Now let's turn to business news, because the tech giant Apple has just lost its position as the world's most valuable company amid a broad sell-off of technology stocks. The Saudi Arabian oil and gas producer
is now at $2.43 trillion. I mean, we're talking huge sums of money here, but when you're looking at kind of how the market and how investors value these companies, what we're seeing here is a shift. Chains and lockdowns in China have made life harder for companies like Apple with manufacturing facilities there. In fact, they think it will cost them $4 to $8 billion in sales potentially in the next 3 months because of these kind of log jams. Then you look on the other potential kind of collapse in this market right now. And a lot of this ties back to another theme that we go back to a lot right now, and that is inflation and rising prices. Cryptocurrencies were seen as potentially a sort of safe place to kind of put your money.
Global, the glories of Cambodia's ancient culture, but thousands of precious items have been smuggled out of the country. We'll be looking at the battle to get them back. Finland's leaders announced that they will apply for NATO membership without delay. Russia says it will be forced to take reciprocal steps. Let's stay with the situation in Ukraine and get the latest on the conflict on the ground, because Ukrainian forces in that correspondent Sarah Rainsford has sent this report.
These are Russian soldiers on their way to loot and to kill. But their every move is caught on multiple cameras. And so is Leonid, the security guard. He told Vasya the soldiers claimed they don't kill civilians. Then they shot him.
I asked how he was. I said, "Can you at least bandage yourself up?" And he said, "Vasya, I barely..."
Clothes and mattress bundled up outside. He died before help could reach him. I met the men who tried to save Leonid, Sasha and Kostya, who sold air conditioning before the war. Those days, with Russian tanks rolling past their positions. Police have told us the Russians shot at anything that moved here. They found the bodies and businesses along this road that you see, but things like this. 2 Russian tanks just lodged in the forest, and you can see the V's painted on the front. And it's a really stark reminder of just how fierce the fight. She wants her father's killers to face justice.
My dad was not a military man at all. He was a pensioner. They killed a 65-year-old. What for? I'm not so much.
Sarah Rainsford, BBC News, Kiev.
Now let's return to the city of Dnipro in Ukraine, which is taking a symbolic stand against Russia's war in Ukraine. Officials are removing statues with links to the Soviet.
See a Red Army soldier with a young girl planting a tree together. That means they are growing a future. That is very symbolic for the Soviet time. But all we experienced was aggression and war, when communist rule was enforced.
One more story to squeeze in, because Cambodia has asked for help from the UK government to track down stolen antiquities. Many were looted from temples over the last 50 years when the country was engulfed.
Countries, but even so, most Cambodians will spend what they can to travel here at least once in their lives. These statues are more than just stone. They're thought to be living gods. But look closely.
Imagine a looter would cut that, take it, smuggle it across a border, probably into Thailand, and then on into some auction house. We simply don't know where this has gone.
Angkor was looted over 100 years ago, but thousands of other...
Now we're on our way to see a man they call Red Horse.
He leads me to the remains of an 11th century temple.
Wow. These dead vines are...
Oh, I see. There's a few things. Cambodian investigators are confident the statue Red Horse says he found...
This thing. This is what you took. Took it from inside there.
...is now in the British Museum.
Okay.
These are tracking thousands of missing statues.
Celia Hatton with that report. Now, it is a nightmare thought that most of us try to shut out of our minds as we board a plane. You're mid-air and your pilot falls ill, unable to fly.
Pilot of this Florida-bound single-engine Cessna 208 suddenly got ill mid-air. He fell against the controls, sending the aircraft into a nosedive and sharp turn, leaving passenger Darren Harrison on a wing control.
I've got a serious situation here. My pilot has gone incoherent. I have no idea how to fly the airplane.
Number 333 Lima Delta, roger. What's your position?
I have no idea. I see the coast of Florida in front of me.
To help guide the plane down.
When somebody just drops that bomb on you that you're not expecting, like, here's the situation, it was just like, whoa, I felt like I was in a movie.
But he wasn't. Morgan's job now to keep the passenger turned away. The man who brought the plane down safely hugged his unexpected instructor on the tarmac before rushing home to see his pregnant wife. The original pilot was taken to hospital. His condition remains unknown. Mark.
Here in the next little while, of course, all of that as the US passes 1 million COVID deaths. So that important interview coming up on the programme in the next few minutes. We'll also bring you the latest from Colombo, because we've heard in the last couple of hours that the president also steps down. That as the economic situation in Sri Lanka continues to spiral downwards, with only 50 million or so of foreign reserves, the country in absolute crisis.
Nurturing and loving, B-Mark mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality, and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony with nature, life...
A man who turned to politics just 3 years before was now facing down the world's second most powerful army.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In-depth programming on BBC World News.
On women who are evangelical Christians.
Ele defende a família acima de tudo, né? E Deus acima de todos.
This October, he looks set to face his old rival, the former president Lula da Silva, in an epic battle for...
As we face the world's greatest environmental challenges, what we need most is solutions. Our new website, Future Planet, brings you stories of the people who are working to make the world a sustainable, with local reporters from around the globe to bring you incredible insight with a reduced carbon footprint.
Future Planet. Solutions for a sustainable world.
This is BBC World News. I'm Matthew Emery-Waller. On today's Global, Finland's leaders announced that they will apply for NATO.
To set in Ukraine on day 78 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which it says it carries out because of a threat from NATO. But now there is more, not less, NATO in this region.
Also on today's
family dinner table.
We'll hear from the families affected. We'll hear more from Joe Biden, who's chairing a global summit on COVID-19. And we'll talk live from the White House to the US Health Secretary. After days of violent unrest in Sri Lanka. Hello and welcome to BBC News. The leaders of Finland have said their country must apply for membership of NATO without delay after the Russian war in Ukraine forced it to reassess its traditionally neutral stance. And the latest from our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet. Lise, this is a really significant moment, isn't it?
Significant moment for NATO, significant moment for Ukraine, indeed for across the region. This is altering the invasion of Ukraine. And time and again, including on Monday in his May 9th Victory Day speech, President Putin has lashed out against the West, and in particular the military alliance, saying that it was threatening Russia, saying that was why Russia would expect and certainly must have surprised President Putin. Today is a historic day for this alliance, with Finland saying it wants to join and Sweden expected to follow suit. Let's cross to Helsinki. Our correspondent,
It's really ironic that it is his actions in Ukraine that have driven the people of Finland to go from about 20% support in public opinion polls for joining NATO suddenly to 76%, according to the last opinion poll.
Something that we cannot accept. And we are currently living in this kind of limbo for European security structures. There is no structure to prevent wars in Europe at the moment.
But nowhere more so than here in the east. And what we've been hearing from Finland's leading politicians today also, Lise, is that they feel it's not just in their interest if they join the military alliance NATO, but they feel they have a lot to offer as well for
Eastern Military Alliance. That was our Europe editor Katja Adler. Well, this move by Finland to join NATO has been welcomed by US lawmakers on both sides of the House, a support that's been echoed by the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg.
But know what Russia's response will be in practical terms. One of my colleagues asked the Kremlin spokesman just now, and he said that a special analysis was underway, but that it would very much depend on how far NATO infrastructure moved towards the Russia. Furious. He never liked NATO or its expansion eastwards. One of the reasons he attacked Ukraine in the first place was because he was concerned that it wanted to join NATO. And yet, as a result of Vladimir Putin's war, he's potentially now looking
counter-offensive just northeast of the second largest city, Kharkiv, taking back several villages and pushing Russian forces closer to the Russian border and indeed out of artillery range for the residents of Kharkiv. Nations now says that at least 1,000 bodies have been recovered from the towns around the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. That is where, as our viewers may remember, there was intense fighting in the first weeks of Russia's invasion.
Yes.
Welcome. Do you worry that if with this expansion of NATO and Russia's criticism of
the full potential in Ukraine and its struggle to advance. So I think from that point of view, Finland and Sweden, hopefully that will follow Finland's decision to join NATO. Also, a period of Russian influence over in Europe, including especially on NATO expansion. If you remember, in 2008, Russia de facto blocked Ukraine becoming the associated. Very different NATO. NATO is very different now. It's much stronger. It has a much better intelligence of what Russia wants to do, of its potential. And I think it's now NATO even accepted the reality that
NATO is not on the table anymore.
Well, our desire is on the table. We do understand that there will be some difficulties while war is happening, difficulties in joining NATO.
Negotiations, they want Russia to return to the positions it held on February the 24th, but we also hear an ambition now to take back all of the territory, even that territory, the Crimean Peninsula, taken in 2014. What would you say?
War wanted to free Ukrainian territory, full territory, out of Russia presence. And that was our ambition and is continuing to be. We understand it will receive from our Western partners. We receive better, more powerful weapons now, but we still need more. And we also need to eventually, that everybody needs to understand that we need an offensive weapons. If we
But when you look at the map and the Russian advance, they're fairly close now to taking all of Donetsk and Lugansk, the Donbass.
Take Azovstal, so they remove some troops, actually to achieve some progress on near Kramatorsk and Slavyansk and that Izum in that area. But we also will relocate our resources.
In here for now, back to you, London.
Lise, thanks once again. Lise Doucette there in Dnipro for us. Now to our other main story here. The White House has announced that the United States has passed more than 1 million deaths from COVID-19. It's the highest official total in the world.
This pandemic. My heart goes out to all of those who are struggling, asking themselves, how do I go on without him? How do I go on without her? What will we do without him? It's grief shared by people.
Based on the issue of new passports in the capital, Beijing, there were rumours online that a strict lockdown was about to be imposed, prompting people to panic buy. But daily cases in Beijing remain in the dozens, a tiny fraction of the outbreak in Shanghai.
In our connected world, all news is international. So, for in-depth analysis,
The impact on Europe and the rest of the world would be devastating.
and correspondents covering both home and global events, get a deeper understanding and find out what is really going on.
On BBC World News. Now to a fascinating story. A black hole is usually a place in space where no light can escape, making it all but impossible to capture it on film. Well, despite that, a team of astrophysicists have managed to photograph a black hole known as Sagittarius A. It is about 60 million kilometres from side to side. That's around 40 million miles. What you see is a centre dark region where the hole resides, circled by the light there coming from superheated gas, accelerated. Just describe for viewers who perhaps aren't familiar with all of this, why it is such an extraordinary photograph, how it was actually done.
Yeah, so this was a hugely challenging observation made by the Event Horizon Telescope.
But not in the Milky Way, not in the universe. Did scientists always suspect it was actually there? I mean, how did they know it was there?
So we've had very good evidence for decades that there is a very compact object quite a long time, that there's probably a supermassive black hole. But this is the first direct evidence that it definitely is a black hole and not some other kind of compact object.
Now, you refer to it, I refer to it as a black hole. One of the scientists involved earlier in the day, and he described it this way: it explains where we came from and where we're going. Just explain to me why.
Yeah, so this is really exciting. So it does today is because of this supermassive black hole at its centre. So if we're going to understand how the Milky Way formed, why it looks like it does, and what it will look like in the future, then it's really vital that we understand this supermassive that we didn't know before this announcement. We know that this black hole is spinning, and we know which way it's facing. We know its face onto us. We didn't know that before, and those are really vital pieces of information to put into, for example, computer simulation.
Days of violence in that country. They have sworn in a new prime minister. He is a veteran politician who served as prime minister 5 times before. Protesters forced out Mahinda Rajapaksa on Monday, blaming him for the economic collapse of the country. They're also demanding that his brother
was appointed a short while ago by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The development comes amid a political and economic crisis here in this country. The previous Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa resigned on Monday after violence broke out. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa should also step down because they want a new political system. But the appointment of Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe may not satisfy these protesters, and many people are wondering what kind of stability.
Don't go away.
Hello. Dangerous heatwave conditions continue through Pakistan and northern and western states of India. Red warnings out in Rajasthan just to illustrate how intense that pre-monsoon heat is. Somewhat cooling down in the next few days with a scattering of showers that are moving in from the west, lifting some dust as well. But heading to Pakistan and that intense heat is with us. Temperatures expected to get towards 50 in some places on 2 or 3 days in a row, as I've mentioned before, and also up across northeastern states into Bhutan, Bangladesh and Myanmar. It remains really quite wet here. More rain than we'd normally see at this time of year. Some showers around in Dhaka, for example, and Colombo, but the heat there with us in Islam.
Indulge in the luxurious, the most spacious, and supremely comfortable BMW 3.
Nurturing and loving, B-Mark mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality, and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony with nature, life
It's the fastest growing of its kind in Europe, but the East-West relationship is under strain. Join me, Nick Beake, for Europe's China Gamble here on BBC World News.
More than 200 years ago, BBC World News.
The White House has announced that the United States has passed more than 1 million deaths from COVID-19. It's the highest official total in the world. And after days of violent unrest, Sri Lanka has sworn in a new Prime Minister. He's a veteran politician.
But one in particular has appeared completely out of sight.
The first time in your life you see a woman going that fast.
She really was the superstar. It was at the epicenter of my athletics career.
I have watched her race.
Performance. On a sweltering hot day, she scorched a victory in her quarter-final in a new world record time of 10.49 seconds. The stunned commentator said, "That cannot be. No one can run that fast."
You're hearing persons saying, "What that..."
5 seconds off Flojo's mark. The impossible now seems possible.
Well, I must tell the truth, it didn't look that fast to me. I didn't feel that fast. So when I 6:10.54, I was like, what? I had the most horrible race in my life.
The first time I officially met her was in 1980 Olympic trials. I'm walking through a corridor and I see this beautiful woman. And I looked at her and I said, wow. You know, and it was her, it was Florence Griffith. And I said, man, she's...
A few years later, first a friendship, then a courtship, before he finally popped the question.
I had a limousine, and I had flowers, a violin, everything ready at the restaurant. And so I come to our house, she said, let's don't go out now. We was at Chuck E. Cheese. And then that's when she ended up reaching across the table and put a yes in my hand. And that's how she told me that the answer was yes.
Now husband and coach, he set about transforming the 1984 Olympic silver medalist into a world beater. Whilst the trainer...
She went to the trial. She brought over 100 and something outfits because I remember carrying a suitcase. She always carried a lot of clothes. Florence believed that when you look good, you perform well, and she always did. She wholly believed that. She totally believed that.
And so women were more empowered to say, oh, I can do things differently. So I think it was very, very impactful.
We started training together, we started working out together. And I told her, I said, you should have won. And also in here wasn't, because she was always strengthening these outside, and just adjust that. And so we started working on that, and we had a hamstring machine that we would work on hamstring. And then she started watching the triple jump films with me. And then she said, watch how I build up. Just learning about the vitamins.
In a matter of weeks.
The life-changing moment was 3 weeks before the Olympic trials in Balboa in San Diego. Our whole goal was definitely the 400 meters. She gets there, and they didn't have the 400 meters. So they put Florence in the 100. And Florence runs a 10.8. I'm gonna break that. And she said, what you mean? I said, you're gonna run about 10.5. And then they said, why you telling me I'm 10.5? Because I said, that's what time I run the 100, you've been beating me. So that's how you better not let no one beat you, because I said, and I wasn't all out, but I've been all out against you. When we was running against each other.
West trials, Al Joyner was in action in the triple jump, where he was hoping to make the team to defend his Olympic title.
I missed our first round. And I know when I came out trying to say, oh, that's unbelievable. And you know, when they said the time was 10:60, even though it's when it's 10:60, nobody's legal. I was just ecstatic. You know, that 10:49 was a beautiful race. Watching my wife set the world record in 100.
Flojo's time was the biggest improvement in the world record since the introduction of electronic timing. But that record
have a 180 jump, and yet still she's getting a legal jump. So obviously, that line of conversation was very strong in our minds, my mind as well. And, you know, it was always very...
Over twice the legal limit.
If anybody ever look at the picture, her hair is blowing across her face right before she gets started. It's a crosswind. And that's why now when people look at stadiums right now, they look for that, because it could be, sometimes it could be a crosswind or a dive
test after he won the men's 100 meters final. And her performances would raise similar questions. Allegations her dramatic improvements were aided by performance-enhancing drugs gathered momentum.
If you go back and look at, that's the difference. That's the secret. You know, that's the secret. And the hard work, eating right, doing the things that is sleeping right, not knowing what the person went through to get there. And then she had a special gift from God. I just believe she just had something special. And so she went on and did until 30 some odd years later. They're still talking about it. And now they're saying all of a sudden, oh, people getting close to it, now they can do it. Okay, oh, I don't hear no drug situation now, because it was never about drugs. It's about hard work, dedication.
Flojo decided to hang up her spikes. Her critics said it was because of the fear of being caught with the introduction of random drug testing.
When Florence retired, I asked her to retire. She wanted to become a mom. So it wasn't hiding anything. We already had out a drug test. We were just calling 911, hoping that they told me it was a dream. And I held her and just looked at her, and she was gone. That's one of the worst days of my life. It's one of the worst days. I wanted to catch my wife. I wanted to be with her.
Flojo may be gone, but her records and influence certainly live on.
The 设计能够让更多还没有办法去玩游戏的人能够加入到游戏的这个行业里面来。
Så innan så kunde jag inte klicka eld.
去做这件事情，我们觉得非常的自豪。
I've watched her races.
She broke Flojo's Olympic records en route to winning gold at Tokyo 2020, before going even quicker at the Diamond League meeting in Eugene a few weeks later. Her winning time, 10.54, just 0.05 of a second away from what...
Comfortable, you feel like you have done the worst in your life, but then it's the best race that you have because you don't feel too perfect. When I look on that race, I was like, hell no, that probably must be a wrong time on the clock. I did not run 10.5.
Bert Cameron is a former 400 meter.
She was even faster than I because I was a quarter miler. It was unbelievable. So years passed by, people don't believe that anyone would come that close. But if you look at what Elaine has done last year, and when she...
Because I cannot plant the foot down properly because it's so sore and stiff in the morning. It was very painful. I think at one point I said I'm gonna call it because I'm not producing the way I want to. If you cannot train.
She went on to become just the first woman and second athlete after Usain Bolt to win consecutive Olympic 100 and 200 meters titles.
Even the point, I don't know where that comes from, the whole celebration, I don't know where that damped me, and I was, overwhelmed and happy.
But after the season of her life, she decided to leave her longtime coach Stephen Francis and team up with her husband.
I think I have outgrown the situation. I want to do things my way.
Big job, but an easy job in the sense that we're dealing with a very professional person, seasoned professional. The pressure for me really is just to make sure that she's healthy. I think she has a lot more in store, so that's why I said
find the tracks that you know are going to be good, and then hopefully you get the competition to run in with Shelly, because that also pushes you to do good.
It's a really good question because it takes different things on different occasions. Track and field, they are still...
Everybody wants to take the gold medal, so I think once I have that lineup and that good weather, I think it is possible.
I don't want to get into trouble with either one of them, but which one of them do you think is close? Which one of them do you think can do it? Is closest?
I don't know. You know what I mean? I don't pick because they're both Jamaicans. I'm happy. You know what I mean? I know Shelly and personally, we actually have conversations. So for me, I've always said that I wish them all the best. And
enough to a target, and you set your sights on the target. Something happens, there must be a catalyst that drives you to get to that target. Let me tell you the catalyst that I believe.
Person or younger person out there will look and say, well, I can go faster because it's believable.
And what impact will it have on the sport when the records do eventually fall?
Look, I think any world record that stood for the best part of 40 years is a huge moment for the sport because it suddenly sets a fresh benchmark. It creates a whole new generation of ambition and inspiration.
You don't know when a world record is going to come, and you don't. And when you do it, you better grab it.
30 years old, and to see myself as a 30-year-old sprinter breaking Flojo's record would be something very spectacular. That would be writing all over in the history book. That cannot be erased, and that would be something very important to me. I'll leave a legacy out there for the younger boys and girls, not only girls, because people always say we're leaving out the boys, younger boys and girls, to say whatever you put your mind to, you can achieve that. Don't let the naysayers or anybody say that you cannot.
We start at Wimbledon.
Stand by for a moment of history.
The headlines keep breaking.
The Winter Olympics.
Now to cricket.
The Tour de France.
The Africa Cup of Nations.
The debate keeps raging.
They're still the team to beat.
England's back.
She is warm, nurturing and loving. B-Mark mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality, and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony,
Hello there. With dry and windy conditions across parts of the southwest USA, the Four Corners and into the southern central plains, the fire danger remains critical in places. This deep area of building, though, across Siberia, pushing some quite intense storms across the Alps into Austria, parts of the Balkans and Poland. We've had warnings out for that. Windy and unsettled further north, but the fire risk here too is high because in places it's quite dry and gusty winds. Those gusty winds peaking at 50 degrees Celsius potentially, but it's just been the persistence, the longevity of this event since April. We've been seeing that intense heat, record breaking in April, and certainly really pushing the limits by day and night at the moment. Then we